TLS website. And so you can share with your friends in case they couldn't make it with us. So I'll begin. Welcome, everyone. I think that I recognize every name on here, so I don't see any schools with us today. And most of you know me. I recognize everybody's name here. So most of you know me. I'm Sue Plaxon. I'm the State E-Rate Coordinator for Public Libraries and the IT Network Program Manager for Georgia Public Library Service. Our presenter today is Candace Hall. She is the State E-Rate Analyst, and she works with the Board of Regents ITS Department, and she is the E-Rate guru. I know that many of you had her help when you were getting set up for the first time before I joined GPLS. So you know how awesome and special she is, and I rely heavily on her. So the purpose of today's webinar is to kind of really get down into the nitty-gritty of category details and discuss some of the mistakes that are super easy to make because Category 2 can be a confusing process. And so we're hoping that this webinar can help ease some of that for you all going out for Category 2. And so thank you all for being here. And Candace, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thanks, Sue. So everyone's on mute, but if you have a question or comment, you can unmute yourself by clicking the red microphone next to your name. Or you can also type your questions or comments in the chat box. And I'll try to stop every once in a while to make sure everyone's still with us. So as Sue said, today we're going to talk all about Category 2 and really take a deep dive into what's happening with Category 2 and some common mistakes that we hope to avoid moving forward with Category 2. So when we talk about C2, we're talking about your equipment needs. These are usually your one-time purchases, so things like access points, cabling, switches, routers, things that are in your network closet. Category 2 is connectivity within the building. If you were on our call this morning, we talked about the differences between C1 and C2. C1 is connectivity to the building. C2 is connectivity within the building. And the service types under Category 2 are internal connections, basic maintenance of internal connections, and managed internal broadband service, MIBs. And in a little bit, we're going to talk about the difference between those service types. But I just wanted to get you thinking Category 2 is mostly equipment. So to give you a little background on the history of Category 2, prior to the modernization order that came out in 2014, went into effect in 2015, Category 2 was handled a little bit differently. Actually, the categories of service were referred to as Priority 1 and Priority 2. Those of you that have been around for a little while, you may remember when services were called P1 and P2. They're the same services, just different names now. But the reason that they were referred to as Priority 1 and Priority 2 back then was because what would happen is you didn't have a budget for Category 2 like we do now. You could apply for as much as you wanted, but USAC funded Priority 1 services first. All Priority 1 applications were reviewed first and funded. And then if there was any money left over in the E-rate fund after all P1 was funded, then they would look at Priority 2 applications and fund whatever they could. But what would happen is a lot of times they would run out of money after all after they funded all of the Priority 1 services. And so a lot of times there were many years where no one received any Priority 2 funds. There were a lot of years where only the top discount bands received Priority 2 funds. So, you know, your 90%, at that time you could get up to 90% for Priority 2. So your 90%, your 80%, those were the people that were funded, and everyone else didn't get any Priority 2 money. In fact, that went on for so many years in the program that library systems and school districts that were less than, you know, 80%, a lot of times wouldn't even apply for Priority 2 because, you know, it just never got funded, and it wasn't worth the hassle of going through the application process because the chances of them getting funded were very slim. So, so for some of you, Category 2 may be a completely new thing starting in 2015 because it just, a lot of people didn't even go out for it before then. So the FCC recognized that this was a problem that needed to be addressed. You know, just as internet access and your wide area networks, if you have them, those are really important services. The internal infrastructure, your network equipment, is just as important. And so they wanted to make sure that there was something, they wanted to do something to make sure that everyone had access to some Priority 2 funds. And so that's why in the modernization order, they came up with Category 2 budgets. And so with that order, so that came into effect in 2015, and now we're operating under the Category 2 budgets. Those are per building budgets. With the modernization order, it also changed the maximum discount that you could get for Category 2. So instead of 90%, if you're a 90% library system, for Category 2, the most you can get is an 85% discount. And your budgets for libraries are based on your square footage of your building. So basically the square footage within the 4 walls of your building multiplied by a number. And I think I have a slide in a minute that does that calculation, so we can look at that. Again, that money has to stay at that building. So each, you know, library branch gets their own budget. And these budgets are 5-year budgets. So the 5 years started in 2015, or could have started in 2015. Let me back up. With these Category 2 budgets, you can choose to use all the money in 1 year. So some of you may have already exhausted your budget and used all of it in 1 year. Or some people decide to spread the money out, you know, across multiple years and use a little bit each of the 5 years. These budgets increase for inflation every year. So in a minute, we'll look at the calculation. But for most library systems, most library branches, you're going to multiply your square footage times $2.30. And then for large urban libraries, you're going to multiply your square footage by $5. That was the base amount in 2015, and then every year those numbers have gotten a little bit larger because of inflation. And so here's the calculation that you'll use for this upcoming funding year. So this morning we talked about that we are moving into making plans for funding year 2019. And so these are the numbers that you'll use to plan for your 2019 bids if you're going out to bid for C2. So with inflation, with the inflation factor, you would multiply your total square footage by $2.40. And if you're an urban library means that you have a locale code of 11, 12, or 21. So if you're an urban library, then you would multiply your square footage by $5.21. And there's a minimum budget that started at $9,200 and that's increased for inflation, and it's now $9,582.23. So this is a good starting point. If you are wondering, how much money is in your Category 2 budget, this is a good place to start, is to calculate your full budget and see how much you had. Here's an example, and this is a school example, but it's the same method of calculating it for libraries. The thing I want to point out with this slide is that these budgets are pre-discount. So what that means is that this is not the amount that E-rate is going to pay. This is the pre-discount amount. So this is before your E-rate discount has been taken out. So if you look at this example, School A, their budgets are not based on square footage, but on student count. So School A has a student count of 625 students, and their multiplier is $153.47 times the number of students. So that gives them a total budget of $95,000. The point here is that this $95,000 is not what E-rate is going to pay. It's your total budget pre-discount amount. So you still would need to multiply that number by 60% or whatever your library system discount is. Multiply your total budget by that, and that'll give you the number that E-rate is going to pay. So in this example, we are multiplying $95,000 by 60%, and that gives you how much E-rate is going to pay, which is $57,000. So as I mentioned, these budgets started in 2015. So for many of you, you've probably already utilized some of the funds. And at this point, you're wondering maybe how much is left in your budget. So the way that USAC handles these budgets is that any funds that are committed to a library in a funding year, those are considered used funds. And what I mean by that is that if you've gone out to bid and you've filed your Form 471 and you've gotten an FCDL, a funding commitment decision letter, that has committed funds for a library branch on it, those funds are considered used, meaning that they have come out of your budget, they're considered used. Even though that money may have not been dispersed yet, it's considered used by USAC. And so what happens sometimes is, you'll go through the whole process, you'll get funded for a C2 project, and then you'll realize that for whatever reason, you can't go through with the project and you need to cancel it. And in that case, if those funds have been committed on an FCDL, they're considered used by USAC, and so you would need to return that money. So even though it hasn't been dispersed yet to anyone, you or the service provider, it still looks like it's been used, it's come out of your budget, and so you don't waste that money, you need to return it using a Form 500. And if you feel like you're in this situation, then reach out to me or Sue, and we can help you file that Form 500 so that money isn't just wasted and you didn't actually use it. So this next example is for those of you that have used some of your Category 2 money and you want to see what's remaining in your budget. So again, this is a school example, but it's the same process for libraries. So again, we're looking at School A. They have 625 students. They have their multiplier of $153 per student. They have a total budget of $95,000. But then they know that they have used a total. So from 2015, 16, and 17, they've used a total, and now 18. They've used a total of $44,000, and so they would subtract any of these committed funds from their total budget, which will give them their remaining budget, this $51,000. But remember again that this $51,000 is pre-discount, so then you would have to multiply that by your E-rate discount, in this example, which is 60%, and that'll give you this $30,000, which is what E-rate will cover. So I think I skipped a step. If you haven't kept up with how much each branch has gotten, since 2015, then a good resource to use is the Category 2 budget tool on USAC's website. This is not in Epic. This is on the USAC website, and I can send you a link to it. But this tool, you put in your entity numbers. So each library branch has an entity number. You'll enter those, and the tool pulls up each funding year since 2015. So 2015, 16, 17, and now 18. And it pulls information from your 471s, and so it'll show if that library branch received any funding, C2 funding in those funding years, and it'll give you a total at the top. So that's a good place to start, and then you would want to calculate your full budget, like we did in the first example, and then subtract anything that that Category 2 budget tool shows so that you see what's remaining. Does that make sense, Sue?
Yes, it does make sense. Sorry, you caught me looking up the link, so I can post it
okay.
in. I'm going to post it to everyone in chat, the link that Candace is referring to. We've had a few people join us kind of in medias res, so while I'm cutting and pasting, can we stop for questions or catch up?
Sure.
If anyone has anything.
Sure.
So for those of you who recently joined us, do you have any questions? You can either use the chat box or unmute yourself by clicking on the red mic. Okay, if there aren't any, then I've posted the link to everyone. Oh, go ahead.
Pre-2015 funding year for Cat 2.
I'm sorry, part of your question was cut off. What was it again?
You were telling us how to find out your funding for Cat 2 after fiscal year or funding year 2015. What if you spent the money before that 2015?
Well, these budgets started in 2015. That was the first funding year. In just a minute, we're going to talk about, that whole 5-year cycle. But that's prior to funding year 2015, we weren't working under budget. So anything that happened prior to 2015 is just, it is what it is. It doesn't come into this calculation for this first 5-year cycle. 2015 was the first year that we had Category 2 budget.
Okay, so that information is captured in this database then, okay?
Right, right.
Because it wasn't originally, but maybe it's in there now.
It wasn't. In the Category 2 budget tool, USAC has had a lot of issues with capturing all of this data in one location. So there's a Category 2 budget tool in Epic, and I don't recommend you use that because it's not updated and it doesn't have all the funding years. I think it starts with 16. So don't use that one. Use the link that Sue just put in the chat box. That'll take you to USAC's website, and that tool is more up to date. So it shows any committed funds, Category 2 committed funds from funding year 15, 16, 17, and now 18. If your applications have been processed for 18, which hopefully most of yours have, it'll show all of those funding years. And so you would take that amount and subtract it from your total budget to see what's remaining.
And if you need some one-on-one help, Candace and we will be happy to help you. Just shoot us an email.
So let's see. So the future of Category 2. So I mentioned that these budgets started in 2015 and they're 5-year budgets. And so for some of you, this first 5-year cycle sunsets with funding year 2019, which is what you're going to be going out to bid for this fall, and it's services that are actually going to start July 1 of 2019 and run through June 30th of 2020. It's important, a couple things to note here. The 5-year cycle is not is system-wide. It's not per branch. So each of your library branches aren't going to be on a different 5-year cycle. And what I mean by this is that if any of your library branches received Category 2 funding in funding year 2015, then your 5-year cycle started in 2015. For many of you, I know we had a lot of applicants that wanted to kind of wait and see what happened in 2015 because all of this Category 2 budget stuff was very new. It came out late in 2014, and so a lot of people didn't apply for C2 in 2015, and they all waited until 2016. And so if any of your library branches, if none of your library branches received C2 funding in 2015, but they did in 2016, then your 5-year cycle started in 2016. And so funding year 2019 is not your last year. Funding year 2020 would be your last year. And so that wasn't something that was really clear when we started this whole process, but it's a system-wide 5-year cycle. So even though the budget is not system-wide, it's per building, the 5-year cycle is system-wide. So if any of your branches received C2 in funding year 2015, then your 5 years started in 2015, and funding year 2019 is the last year of your 5-year cycle. Go ahead.
And Candace, excuse me, and I would also like to add kind of the flip side to that coin. If you have built a branch, you know, if say you received your money for the first time in 2015 and you had a new branch open in 2017, that 5-year cycle still applies to that branch. So you are still, that branch, even though it's new, it has its Category 2 budget ending in 2019.
Right. So if you've built a new branch, then it may not get the full 5 years to use the money because your system is most likely already well into that 5-year cycle. So a couple things that we don't know, the future of Category 2. One is when the FCC came out with these 5-year budgets, they didn't really make a plan past funding year 2019. That was the end of the first 5-year cycle, and after that, we don't really know what's going to happen. The FCC hasn't come out with a decision. They did come out with a public notice last fall asking just some, general questions about how these budgets are working. Is it enough money? Do you like that it's per branch or should it be per system? Those kind of questions, and people responded. A lot of people from the applicant community responded. I think GPLS submitted comments, or ALA did. But we haven't heard anything else on that. So we don't know what action the FCC is going to take. We could start a whole new 5-year cycle after 2019, where those that have, those that started in 2015, they'll get a new budget in 2020, or everyone could start fresh in 2020, or they could do something else. We just don't know the answer to that question yet, and so there are going to be some big changes to Category 2 in future. We just don't know what they are yet. The way that the modernization order reads, if the FCC decides not to take action, then we would revert back to Priority 2, which is what we talked about when we first started today. We would revert back to the Priority 2 way of handling Category 2, where you don't have a budget. You can apply for as much as you want, but there may not be enough money in the fund to fund that. The other part of Priority 2 that I didn't mention before is that there was a 2 and 5 rule. So some of you that have been filing for E-rate for a while may remember the 2 and 5 rule, which that rule states that you can only receive funding for internal connections every 2 out of 5 years, not every year. So that's only if, we will only do that if the FCC decides not to take action, which just my personal opinion, I think that they will. I think they will reinstate the Category 2 budgets. There may be some changes. I know there are a lot of suggestions in that comment period last fall, so I expect, this is just my opinion, I expect that they will continue on with this C2 budget idea, but there may be some small changes to it. So, but we'll see. Hopefully, you know, they're going to come out with that decision soon, because I know that people, you know, are making plans well in advance of the 2020 funding year. So the order also reads that certain C2 services will no longer be eligible after 2019. One of those is MIBS, Managed Internal Broadband Service. I know some of the libraries get this service, so that's something to consider, is that that service, as the modernization order reads, will no longer be eligible after this first 5-year cycle. That could change too. We just really don't know what the FCC is going to decide to do. The other thing is that, you know, I always recommend to our schools that, you know, even though E-rate isn't a guaranteed funding source, these Category 2 budgets, the way that the FCC designed them, the way they came up with, you know, the $150 per student for schools or the $2.30 for libraries, they're somewhat guaranteed in that there is enough money in the fund to cover everyone's Category 2 budget. So that's why I recommend using the money now while we know that it's available, because, you know, although I don't think that Category 2 will go away in 2020, it could. So that is why I just have told schools that, you know, if they have a need, then they should use it now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
If anyone has any questions, this may be a good time to stop before we move into the C2 gotchas.
I'm not seeing anything on chat.
Okay. Well, we can go on. So this next part is just some tips and tricks to remember if you're going out to bid for Category 2 this year. These are just things that we have seen happen in prior funding years, and we want you to try to avoid them this coming up funding year 2019. So, this first one is a Category 1 thing, and the rest of it is Category 2, but I just wanted to mention this, that the drop-down options on the 470 for Category 1 have changed again. These changed last year. You may remember reading something about this, and they've changed again. Basically, the FCC and USAC want to know if your service, your C1 service, is provided over fiber or not. And so that's why these options have changed again, to try to be more clear for service providers and for their data purposes, you know, whether your service is being delivered over fiber or not. And I bring this up because it's just so important to select the correct option on your Form 470. If you don't, then when you get further into the process, USAC will come back and say that you had a competitive bidding error because, you know, your 470 wasn't filled out correctly. And so if you are going out to bid for your Category 1 services this year, that means that you would have to post a new Form 470, and you get there and you're not sure which option to choose, give us a call so that we can help you select the right option, so you don't have a competitive bidding issue.
Candace, if I may just interject, for libraries, you all really don't care how the internet comes to your building. So for all of you, and you will hear me say this when we get closer to talking about 470 and going out for bid in our E-rate year, but for you guys, you are going to be selecting 2 services. You're going to request services for least lit fiber, with or without internet access. And then you will also request the service internet access and transport bundles, parentheses non-fiber. And those are the only, I don't think in any case in any library in the state are there any exceptions to these rules. So when you file for Category 1 services, you're going to select leaflet fiber and internet access transport bundle. And that way you are covered. And the vendors that provide fiber but don't provide copper, and those that provide copper but don't provide fiber can all see your bids, and that way you are going to avoid the, the open and fair bidding violation that Candace was referring to. Does anyone have any questions about that? And you'll hear me say this again, but I just wanted to point out that for libraries in Georgia, it's leaflet fiber and internet access and transport bundles. Thanks, Candace.
So the rest of this is Category 2. That was the only Category 1 thing. So going over budget, I do not recommend anyone apply for over budget. The system allows you to apply over budget, but I've worked with lots of applicants that have just had a really hard time when they do this. So what happens if you apply for over your budgeted amount is that once you get into PIA, you'll have to work with your reviewer to bring your request, your funding request within budget. And depending on how large your project is or how large your library system is, you may have lots of line items on your form, and you'll have to adjust those line items so that everything fits within budget. It can just become a very tedious process, and sometimes PIA reviewers are not the easiest to work with, I'll just say. And I've just seen a lot of applicants, this has just been a nightmare for them. And so I would suggest do not apply for more than what's in your Category 2 budget. I know that some people do apply for over budget because they want to use every last penny of what's in there, and they just think, I'll fix it in PIA. And the system does allow you to do that, but I just have seen it's been a nightmare for a lot of people. So the next thing is selecting the correct service type. So just like we talked about selecting the correct service type for Category 1, this is really, really important for Category 2, and I've seen libraries and schools mess this up in the last few funding years, and USAC has not really been very lenient with this. So it's so important, once you get into the form, once you select Category 2, the service type options under Category 2 are internal connections, basic maintenance of internal connections, and managed internal broadband services. And we'll talk about the differences between those in just a minute. But if you don't know the difference and you get into the form and you're not sure what you need falls under, then please give us a call so that we can help you select the correct service type. Because if you get this wrong on your Form 470, again, you will be cited for a competitive bidding issue, and the whole thing could be denied. The other issue that I've seen is people will select one thing on their 470 and another thing on their 471, so they don't match. There's a mismatch there. Sometimes this is just a clerical error, but sometimes it's, or, for whatever reason, you just didn't understand the difference, or you didn't remember what you put on your 470. But this can cause issues in invoicing. And so it's just really important that not only do you select the correct service type on both your 470 and 471, but that those match, that your 470 and your 471 match. So what's the difference between basic maintenance and managed internal broadband service? So yeah, I wanted to talk about what's the difference between the different service types under Category 2. So for internal connections, if you are getting equipment, then that goes under internal connections. So anything like cabling, switches, routers, access points, UPSs, all of that is equipment purchases. That is internal connections. But the big one, the big mistake that I see is what's the difference between basic maintenance and MIBs? So I wanted to go over that. So basic maintenance of internal connections, one, it's just the basic maintenance, repair of eligible equipment. So the equipment that the maintenance is being provided for, that equipment has to be E-rate eligible. So it can't be maintenance of computers or maintenance of, you know, devices, phones or something like that. It has to be maintenance of eligible equipment. So this would be things like cable maintenance or basic tech support, configuration changes, things like that. And typically, when you get a bid for basic maintenance, you're asking for an hourly rate. So let's say something was going on with your wireless and you called a service provider and said, hey, you know, something's going on with our wireless. Can you send a technician out to look at it? That is basic maintenance, where you're paying an hourly rate for someone to come out and provide maintenance on your equipment. And the way that that works through the filing process is that typically a service provider is going to give you an hourly rate for a technician. You're going to come up with an estimate of how many hours you think you'll use in a funding year, and that's what you will put on your 471 for your funding request. And then when you're funded and throughout the funding year, you'll keep a log of the maintenance, you know, the hours that they've come and a work log. And then you'll invoice USAC for the actual work performed. That's one thing with basic maintenance is you can only invoice USAC for actual work performed. So it's a little bit confusing, and I don't think that the filing process is really set up, and these Category 2 budgets are really set up the best way for basic maintenance, but that's how it works. So when you think of basic maintenance, you're thinking of an hourly rate, you're calling a technician, they're coming on site to do these kind of basic tech support, configuration kind of things.
Candace, Ben has a question. He says, would cable maintenance in this case include running Cat 6 to replace old Cat 5 cabling or adding new cable drops to a room?
No, that would be applied for under internal connections because you're getting new cabling.
Okay, thank you.
Or you're adding new drops, yeah. So that would be applied for under internal connections.
So, thanks.
Thank you. All right, so the next thing is managed internal broadband service, or they call it MIBS. So this came out, this is a fairly new service type that came out with the modernization order. And MIBS covers the operation and management and monitoring of your equipment. It could also include, sometimes applicants will lease equipment, so rather than owning, purchasing it outright, they will lease it. Or sometimes applicants will pay an outside vendor to maintain the equipment that they own, monitoring and maintaining the equipment that they own. So typically, when you get a bid for MIBS is a monthly fee. It's something, you're either paying a monthly fee to lease that equipment, or you're paying a monthly fee for them to manage and monitor your equipment. But it's a monthly fee. So that's kind of the difference between basic maintenance and MIBS, is that they're monitoring it for you and providing support in that way. And I know that we have some library systems that use MIBS, so you can reach out to them and get more information about what their contract covers. But that's kind of the basic difference is, MIBS is typically a monthly, and basic maintenance is an hourly. I hope that helps solve the confusion between that. When MIBS came out with the order, there wasn't a whole lot of guidance So I know that there's been confusion ever since 2015 with, you know, what's the difference and what falls under MIB. So, but either way, if you get confused when you get into the form, just give us a call because it's just so important that you choose the correct service type on your forms.
Candace, I'd like to add a few things because this is unique to Georgia libraries specifically. So most of you are aware that MRR funds have been used to cover the non-discounted portion of your Category 2 E-rate funding. And there's been a change in this coming year, and labor is no longer going to be covered for MRR. So if you are looking at either basic maintenance of internal connections or your managed internal broadband services, so if you're looking at either bidding out for an hourly rate or a monthly fee, while those are still E-rate eligible, MRR will not cover the discounted portion of those fees. And so I just wanted to point that out and make sure that you all understood that.
Or if the way I understand it, if install is included under your internal connections bid, so if you're getting new cabling or if you're getting new switches or access points and you have included installation in that bid, then the way I understand it, Sue, is that MRR won't cover that piece either. So keep that in mind with internal connections also.
Thank you. Yes. And so many of you have met Shannon Furlow. She is our new MRR person. And so this is where kind of our jobs intersect a little bit. Either Shannon or I can help you with your Category 2 request. She can certainly help you on the MRR end of things. And she will be giving out more information at the directors meeting next week about this. Candace, are we going to talk about one of the pitfalls is also, say you go through a problem with all of this and asking for the right service, is that sometimes you're thinking that you're asking for the right thing, and you file for a particular service on your 470, and you match it on your 471, but it turns out that what you really wanted was internal connections, and you filed for funding for MIB. Some of these problems are not getting caught until invoicing, until after the work is done. So if it's one thing that you take from our 90 minutes together, if you have any questions at all before you file, please check with Candace and me or me about your Category 2 request, because sometimes those will shoot straight through PIA review because according to the reviewer, they don't see anything, they don't see a problem. Everything is matching up, but the problem turns out that after your service provider has performed the work and done what you've asked them to do, they will turn around and invoice for internal connections when your funding request is for MIBs, let's say. And so this is why we're doing this webinar, is just because it's really important that all these things just don't get caught until sometimes it's too late. Are there any questions about that? I know this is really nuanced stuff, and I'm not trying to scare anybody. I just want to make sure that we're clear.
To go back to Ben's question about, he asked, is cable maintenance in this case, including running Cat 6 to replace old Cat 5 cabling or adding new cabling drops to a room. So it does seem like that would be cable maintenance, and therefore that would be filed under basic maintenance of internal connections. But actually, new cabling, this case it sounds like this is new cabling drops, so that would be considered internal connections. it would need to be filed under internal connections. I think cable maintenance would be a case where you already have cabling in place, but one of your drops is maybe not working or something like that, and you needed someone to come out and just look at that one drop. But it wouldn't be installing a all new cabling and that kind of, or adding new drops, that kind of thing. But yeah, so it can be a little tricky, and the point is just to make sure that from the get-go you're selecting the right service type.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that, Candace. Thanks.
So the next thing is some Category 2 ineligible, some misconceptions about what's eligible under C2 and what isn't. Servers, they used to be eligible for E-rate, and now the only servers that are eligible are caching servers. Storage devices aren't eligible. Any kind of end-user device like computers or phones or that kind of thing, none of that is eligible. The big takeaway from this one that I wanted to point out is UPSs, they are only eligible if they support other eligible equipment. I've had several examples of people that were actually denied funding or had to cost allocate because what was plugged into that UPS was not E-rate eligible, and USAC found out about it and deemed it ineligible. So just keep that in mind, that UPSs and racks have to support eligible items. And again, you know, if you're not sure of what's eligible, you can always point back to the eligible services list. That's posted on USAC's website. The one for funding year 2019 is not yet up. The draft is out. You know, I think the comment period is over, but they should be posting the final list, eligible services list for 2019, but they don't change too much year to year, so you can look at last year's and get an idea.
So Ben has a really good question. He is asking, are server racks and UPSs eligible if they support both eligible equipment and ineligible, or must it be exclusively eligible?
If it's supporting both ineligible and eligible, then you would have to cost allocate out the percentage of that component that is supporting ineligible items, which can be difficult. But you just have to cost allocate out anything that was supporting ineligible.
So Ben's follow-up then is, seems to make server racks a bit less useful then.
Right, because the only servers that are eligible are caching servers, and I think that was, if I'm remembering correctly, that was one of the issues with the UPSs, is that someone had a UPS plugged into a server that wasn't E-rate eligible, and they got dinged for it.
So here's where MRR funds may be able to help. Shannon and Emily will be discussing this at length at the directors meeting next week, and so I will have more information for you on that. So where E-rate may not pick up, MRR may be able to help you with funding with that. But I don't have Shannon on the call, and she's the authority on this, and so I won't speak for her. But these are questions that she can help answer. And Ben, in your follow-up question, I guess we have to carefully label stuff for future IT people. And for us, will we forget? Absolutely, yes. I think that's a really good idea. I think, you know, labeling and carefully documenting is always a good practice where E-rate is concerned.
Another best practice is when you go out to bid on your Form 470 or if you issue an RFP, ask your service providers to break out any ineligible items on their pricing sheet so that you know up front if there's something included in a solution that is ineligible. You will know that up front, and you'll be able to see that. The other thing to think about is that some items are partially eligible. One of the big examples that we see is firewalls. Only basic firewall service is eligible, and so a lot of times we'll see that USAC deems a portion of the firewall ineligible, and you'll need to cost allocate that out. And so it's just always helpful if your service providers will break out any ineligible items on the pricing sheet from the get-go so you can see those costs.
And I think that is a really good, breaking out ineligible services, I think is a really good request to put in your RFPs when you go out for bid for Category 2 services. State that outright, that you want the people who are bidding for your business, that you specifically want them to break out the ineligible items. Make that clear. Before we go to the next slide, Andrew has a question. Would Wi-Fi APs for a UPS be considered eligible even if we didn't use E-rate funding to buy the APs?
Well, APs are eligible items, so I would say yes. And
okay.
I see another question. I don't know if it just came to me. Let me hold on one second. Oh, okay, never mind. There was just some chatter on the chat box. Okay, I think we got everything. So the next thing is equipment licenses. A lot of times your equipment will have licenses that are required in order for that piece of equipment to actually function properly. This comes into play a lot with access points. Usually an access point requires a license in order for it to work. Licenses should be applied for under internal connections. There's once you click internal connections, there will be another option for you to say what kind of equipment this is, and there's an option for licenses. Multi-year licenses, so sometimes you can buy like a 3 or 5 year license, and all of that can be purchased in year 1. So that's good news. The thing I wanted to mention, I don't know if I have another slide. Maybe I do. Yeah. Sometimes licenses are tricky because USAC, the reviewer, will say that some licenses are actually considered basic maintenance. The one example that I know, and I'm sure there are other manufacturers that have the same kind of thing, but with Cisco, they have a certain license. It's not really a license. It's kind of like and it's not really a warranty either. It's kind of like a management. I'm not really sure what it is, but anyway, it starts with CON, con. And anyway, that license or that line item, USAC considers to be basic maintenance instead of internal connections. And that presents a problem in later down the road because a lot of people, they go out to bid for internal connections. They think that's all I need is internal connections, and they don't realize that this one line item that was included on their 471 actually should have been bid under basic maintenance and not internal connections. And so then they don't have a 470 to support that item. And this happens, I've seen it happen several times last funding year, and it was a real problem. And the other thing is that you don't really realize until it's too late that is considered basic maintenance and not internal connections. And so what I've been telling applicants to do for this upcoming funding year is that if you're going out, if anyone, this applies to anyone, if you're going out to bid for internal connections, I would also, on my 470, I would select, you can select multiple service types, and I would select internal connections and basic maintenance, so that if you end up getting one of these line items in your solution that USAC thinks is basic maintenance, that you're covered and you have the 470 to back it up. So I just tell everyone, if you are going out for internal connections, select IC and BMIC on your 470. And then you'll see down here in the narrative, I just wrote out an example that you can put that says basic maintenance is only needed in the event that USAC deems a software license basic maintenance rather than internal connections. And this is just to save you in case later down the road they deem one of these software licenses basic maintenance. So does that make sense to everyone? This is totally a gotcha in the program, but I've seen several applicants in 2018 that got burned on this, and it was a line item that was a big dollar amount, and I just don't want that to happen. And so the way to avoid it is to select both options on your 470 when you go out to bid, so that you're covered. And then just put this little description in your narrative box so that service providers know you're not really asking for a basic maintenance bid. You're really just asking, you're just putting that on the form to cover you in case USAC thinks it's basic maintenance. Does that make sense, Sue? Did I explain that correctly?
Yes, you did. And coincidentally, I received an email from a library system about this very question. So, but they're not on this call, so I'll be forwarding this onto them. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Equipment transfers. So the E-rate rules require you to keep equipment in place at the location that you indicated on your 471. So remember, on your 471, you'll have to say what equipment you're purchasing and where it's going. And so that equipment must stay in place for 3 years after purchase. After 3 years, you can move that equipment to another eligible entity, so another library branch. But you have to notify USAC that you're moving it, and you would do that using a Form 500. You also, with Category 2, you want to make sure that you're keeping an inventory, some kind of inventory documentation, asset tagging your equipment so that you know where it's located. And if you transfer it, you want to keep record of that so that, if you're audited later and the auditor asks, where is this equipment that you purchased several years ago under this FRN, you say it's here, but now it's not. You just want to make sure that you're keeping documentation of that. But you can move equipment after 3 years, but you have to notify USAC. And then after 5 years, you can basically do whatever you want with the equipment. You can dispose of it, you can sell it, you can transfer it to someone else, you can trade it in, and you don't have to tell USAC about it. I would still keep, documentation saying what you did with it, but after 5 years, you don't have to notify USAC with a 500. Any questions on that? No? Okay, and then document retention, I just always mention this every time we talk about just save everything. Document retention is just so important, especially for Category 2, because, if you are ever audited, an auditor is going to want to see where the equipment is located. Is that the place that you indicated on your 471? So you want to make sure that you're keeping record of that. If you work with a service provider that has done any E-rate business in the past and they know that this is a requirement, and usually they will give that documentation to you after they install the equipment. So some kind of asset register showing you know, what funding year it was purchased under and the FRN, the serial number of the item, and then where it's located. You can request this from your service provider too. So if you haven't received this in previous years, you may have had to do that work on your own, and it can be really tedious. So in future years, I would write that into my bid and say, you know, we want you to hand us this documentation after install. The E-rate document retention rules have changed with the modernization order. So they used prior to 2015, it used to be 5 years that you had to keep documents, and now that's changed to 10. And the rule is 10 years after the last day to receive service. So for example, if you have a contract, a 2018 contract that's ending June 30th of 2019, then you would need to keep anything pertaining to that contract until June 30th of 2029, 10 years from the last day to receive service. And this documentation can be digital or paper, however you choose to keep it. I don't suggest using Epic, the online portal, to keep your documents because, you know, that could go away. USAC has said don't rely on Epic, so I would have some other plan for document retention. And here's some examples of things to retain, but really anything E-rate related you just need to hold on to. But if an auditor comes in, a lot of times they're going to ask about your competitive bidding process. So they're going to want to see the copies of the bids that you received and the contracts. We mentioned this in this morning's session about when you have a signed contract, a lot of times people don't think of having a contract for Category 2, but it's still really important to have something in writing for C2. So if you have a quote from a vendor, you may just want to add your contract terms to that, you know, a cover letter. I think I have an example on our website, or I can point you to some examples where they just took the Category 2 quote from the vendor and then they added a cover letter that had their contract terms and conditions, and it was signed by both them and the service provider. But you want to make sure you're holding on to that. Your bid evaluation matrix, so how you selected a winning vendor, that's really important to hold on to. And then those asset tags, or asset register that we were talking about. But really everything.
Yeah, and on the GA LibTech site, there is an extensive but not exhaustive list of what you should keep for Category 1 and Category 2. I would mention, you know, keep your packing slips. Not many people think to keep packing slips, but those are one of those things that, you know, can serve as a proof of delivery for service. And it's always just a good thing to have. We're at Q&A, so.
We're at Q&A, yeah. We do have a question on the chat. Do the correspondence emails need to be saved in a specific format? No, I don't think so. You just want to make sure that if you talk to service providers during the competitive bidding process, like if you answer questions, sometimes you'll get questions about your bid, your 470, and you have to respond to those, and so you want to keep up with those Q&A, and I would probably just save those emails. I don't think there's a specific format, just as long as you can prove that you followed the process and the E-rate rules.
And if you're doing it online, keep it archived, you know, and just archive your web page if you're going to keep things digitally, or print that page out. That would be another suggestion I have.
One suggestion, if you're going to for answering vendor questions during the bid process, is a lot of times people will, on their 470 or in their RFP, they'll say all questions will be answered on this date and will be posted here. and they'll put it on their library website or their school website. So they'll just collect all of the questions that they receive from vendors during that 28-day period, and they'll, or it doesn't even have to be the 28 days. You can answer them sooner than the 28 days. But they'll just compile all of those, answer them in one document, and post that to their website or attach it to their 470 so that it's all in one place. I hope that answered your question, Andrew. Anything else about Category 2?
For the directors that have joined us, or for those of you who would like to mention to your directors, I will be holding office hours at the directors meeting. So if you have thought of any questions that didn't get answered today or addressed with this webinar, send them with your director, or you can always email me or Candace. We're always happy to talk, and just let us know if you're going to be at GLA. I'll be in the Lit Lab again this year, so come see me. I'll hold office hours at GLA also. So as you kind of get into the process of doing it, I recommend anyone who's thinking about going out for Cat 2 to start your environmental scans now. One thing that we talked about this morning that I know that you all are aware, but that, once you start your bidding process, your RFP and your 470 have to be out on the street for 28 days. So get your preliminary work and your bidding out before January. USAC hasn't announced exact dates when that window, the 471 window application will open, but it will probably be sometime in January to sometime in March. And what you don't want to do is be eating up your application window time with your bidding time. So now's the time to get started to find out your category needs. And if you need help with that, please just let me know or Candace know.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Yes, thank you so much.
Let us know.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Candace.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.